Hello, ladies and gentlemen, this is Philosophossum. As you can probably tell, it's been quite a while since I've last uploaded a video. Basically, over the past 2 months, I've been on somewhat of a hiatus. I took a bit of a break from YouTubing in order to work on some career advancement. But anyways, now I'm back and ready to continue fighting for liberty. Which reminds me, speaking of which, there's another YouTuber who recently came back from a hiatus. Anyone who's been following my channel should probably be familiar with a user who goes by Professor Stick. Just in case you're not, however, I'll briefly get you up to speed. He's a scientist who studies biology, who also has a channel here on YouTube, in which he discusses and debates various scientific issues. Now, I've responded to this guy several times in the past, and the reason I've responded to his channel so much is because he frequently makes videos in which he argues in favor of using the coronavirus pandemic as a pretense to expand government power, implement mandates, and restrict individual liberty. And in this particular video, he makes arguments sympathetic with mandating the vaccine, so let's have a look.
I'm back! You're probably wondering, what in the world is he on about? Well, in the past couple of months, I've actually been pretty much completely away in order to finish my master's degree. Basically, long story short, for those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, I accelerated my graduation. So for the last few months, I took on a lot more work. Basically, that means I didn't have time to really make videos or even read comments on YouTube.
Okay, so I know we don't quite see eye to eye on a lot of our viewpoints, but you know what? Getting a master's degree is a very big accomplishment. So credit where credit's due. Congratulations, Professor.
So what has been happening these past few months? Although I was busy with lots of things, I have still been keeping up with current events. And of course, that thing that shall not be named.
Yeah, you definitely need to be careful anytime you talk about COVID on YouTube, because it seems like anytime you make a video discussing your opinion on the pandemic, whatever that opinion may happen to be, simply mentioning COVID in your video can potentially be grounds for YouTube to either demonetize the video, have the algorithm treat it less favorably, or even straight up just yank it down. Now, for a small YouTuber like me, that's not really much of a problem. My channel's not currently big enough to be monetized anyways. However, for a big YouTuber like Professor Stick, it's understandable why he would want to tread carefully here.
That is killing people as we speak.
Killing significantly less people now that the vaccine is out, which I'm assuming you're going to conveniently not mention.
So this video is going to be a bit of a rant. I'm going to briefly talk about COVID and what it looks like from here, because this is affecting every single one of us.
So it's true that issues like a pandemic do ultimately impact everyone. However, the current pandemic we're experiencing isn't going to impact everyone necessarily to the same extent. The people primarily affected by COVID are elderly, people over 60, immunocompromised, or people with some type of respiratory condition. If you don't fall into any of those categories, then there's a high likelihood that you'll survive catching COVID, especially if you're vaccinated.
For me, I always get incredibly sick from respiratory viruses. If I ever get hit with a common cold, most people are sick for a week. Meanwhile, I'm usually sick for 4 to 6 weeks, with a cough so bad I can't sleep more than just a few hours at night. So for me, personally, I have to take extra care not to get sick.
Well, sure, go right ahead then and take whatever extra precautions you feel are necessary, Professor. My opinion on how the pandemic should be dealt with is basically just treat people like adults. Whatever precautions you feel are necessary to keep you safe, whether that may be wearing a mask, wiping things down, getting vaccinated, whatever, you can go ahead and use your rational judgment as an adult to make those decisions. The problem, however, is that for a lot of these people, simply taking precautions for themselves isn't enough. They insist that they be forced onto the rest of us as well.
And there are people in far worse conditions. We're talking about people who cannot get vaccinated.
So notice how Professor Stick just acknowledged the existence of people who can't take the vaccine. You're going to want to make a mental note of this because we'll come back to it later in the video.
Or people who are immunocompromised.
Yes, we're perfectly aware that there are certain groups of people that are particularly susceptible to COVID, such as I've mentioned previously, people with some sort of immunodeficiency. And these are primarily the people in need of protection. And that's basically what we've been arguing this entire pandemic. Instead of locking down everyone or forcing everyone to wear masks, have targeted protection specifically oriented towards people who need them.
For these people, it's even more important that other people take responsibility for not transmitting the virus around.
Alright, so first of all, that's impossible. Pretty much anything you do is going to pose at least some sort of risk of spreading not just COVID, but any sort of illness around. And second of all, other people's health isn't my responsibility. Now, of course, I will be courteous and extend a reasonable amount of consideration to other people's health. For example, if I'm feeling sick, I'll keep to myself and try not to spread it to others. Or if I happen to be within proximity of someone who's immunocompromised, I'll take whatever precautions are necessary, but I am not obligated to go out of my way to take extraordinary effort to make major modifications to my very lifestyle to protect other people. If you're scared of COVID, protect yourself.
So when I see dumb Twitter posts like this one,
Considering this pandemic has been used as a pretense to justify everything from lockdowns to censoring free speech, can you really blame people for holding this sentiment? Not to mention that he's not exactly wrong, considering you have people like Tom Hartman and Richard Wolff trying to argue why the pandemic exposes the flaws in capitalism and why we need socialism. Heck, a big reason for the labor shortages that are going on right now is because nobody wants to work. They're used to all the pandemic freebies. So yeah, I don't think that the sentiment being expressed in this tweet is that far off from reality.
it really makes me wish I have a bigger influence so that my voice could travel further.
Bruh, your side has it easy. COVID panic and hysteria, mask shaming and lockdowns are the mainstream narrative. It's our side that has the uphill battle.
But we have to start somewhere, don't we? So what has happened in the last few months? Just to name a few of the highlights, it seems that the FDA fully approved the Pfizer vaccine, a third booster shot is being considered, and lots of conspiracy theories surfaced.
So just a quick heads up, the term conspiracy theory is a pejorative word, often used as a way to shorthand dismiss someone else's argument as absurd without having to actually argue against it. A very simple way to poison the well is to describe an idea as a conspiracy theory before you actually introduce or discuss it. So more often than not, when you hear this word being thrown around, it's an indication that you're probably dealing with sophistry.
Like how taking ivermectin somehow cures or treats COVID.
I like how any sort of drug or treatment for COVID other than the vaccines themselves is automatically considered a conspiracy theory. Hydroxychloroquine was a conspiracy theory, now ivermectin is a conspiracy theory. Even though there is evidence that both of these drugs, at least to some extent, are effective at treating certain COVID symptoms.
I don't think I need to explain why an antiparasitic drug would be ineffective against a virus.
Drugs can have multiple uses. It's not uncommon for a drug to be developed for one purpose, and then subsequently found to be effective for other uses as well. For example, the drug that I take for autism was originally developed as an epilepsy medication, so it was originally meant to be a seizure pill.
Maybe that's a topic for a future video. So yeah, I'm glad to see the FDA fully approving Pfizer because a lot of people are hesitant when a vaccine is under emergency use authorization. Although, just to be perfectly clear, EUA is by no means an easy barrier to pass. That being said, I'm sure the full FDA approval has incentivized many to get their shots.
The FDA approving something doesn't necessarily guarantee that it will be safe. There are numerous examples of the FDA passing off on drugs that were later found to be unsafe. You see, a lot of people think that the FDA is there to protect us from unsafe drugs, but if you look at what they actually do in real life, most of it is just supporting big pharma companies by delaying the approval of their competition.
Although I do think the approval took way too long. Yes, the FDA has to rigorously check everything before giving approval, but with so many shots having been administered already, I think we have had enough data a long time ago.
So I do agree that FDA approval of the vaccine took way too long. And yes, of course there's plenty of data suggesting that the vaccines are safe and effective for a while now. But I think this is a case where you could make the argument for smaller government. This is actually a problem that's been going on for a while now. Potentially life-saving drugs inaccessible to the public for long periods of time simply because the FDA is taking their sweet time actually approving it. Does it necessarily have to be the case that every drug used in the United States has to be gatekept by the FDA? Let me propose an alternative. Instead of having one monolithic bureaucratic agency gatekeep all the drugs in the country, why not have multiple separate independent review boards that could test drugs for safety? This could significantly reduce the amount of time it takes to verify the safety of a drug.
This FDA approval also came with a wave of vaccination mandates. especially for companies in regards to their employees.
So, vaccine mandates are kind of a complicated issue. I'll most likely have to discuss them in detail in another video. So, I'll briefly summarize what my opinion is on vaccine mandates here. If you've been following my channel before, you'll pretty much know what my position is on mask mandates. I don't think it's any of the government's business to force people to wear masks, but I do believe that private property owners are within their rights to require them if they feel that's what's necessary. And I more or less have the same opinion on vaccine mandates. I don't think it's any of the government's business to force people to take the vaccine. But if a private business wants to require them for either their customers or employees for whatever reason, I believe they're within their rights to do that, and anyone who disagrees can work or go somewhere else.
Which is good.
I disagree. I don't necessarily consider vaccine mandates to be a good thing. As a matter of fact, one thing I find rather concerning about the whole rush to mandate vaccines and to shame people who don't want to take them is that I feel like it's sort of setting the precedent that people are now going to start taking drugs because of peer pressure, as opposed to treating it carefully like a medical decision. And this is coming from someone who's pro-vaccine, alright? I did take the COVID vaccine, but it's not a decision I took lightly. I was initially very skeptical of the vaccine when it was first being developed. You know, there's this brand new vaccine being rushed out with Lord knows what's in it, so of course I was skeptical of taking it, but I did do my research. I looked at reports from medical journals. I looked at some of the data and statistics regarding how safe and effective the vaccine is, what the rates are for people experiencing side effects, and after doing what I felt to be the proper amount of research, ultimately drew the conclusion that the benefits outweigh the risks, and I decided, you know what the hell, I'll roll my sleeve up, why not? Informed decision making is key on any medical issue. This isn't necessarily an issue of pro-vaccine versus anti-vaccine, it's primarily an issue of informed decision making. Before you take a drug, any drug, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's a Tylenol, a Tums, whatever, you should try to understand what exactly it is you're putting into your body and the potential ramifications of it. Everybody's body is different, and the way a drug may affect one person might not be the way it affects a different person. Not every drug is for everybody, and someone may have an underlying medical condition that makes them unable to take the drug for whatever reason. Professor Stick earlier alluded to the fact that there are people out there who are unable to take the vaccine for whatever reason. But what would you suppose would happen, Professor, if someone was pressured into taking the vaccine because of an employer mandate or because of peer pressure or for whatever reason, and because they didn't do the proper research, they ended up having a severe allergic reaction to one of the ingredients in the vaccine and ends up getting very sick or even dead because of it? It's really not that far-fetched to imagine a situation like this happening.
Honestly, from what I see, a lot of people are way too stupid to make their own decisions about health, so we absolutely need mandates like these.
Hey pal, you just blowing from Stupid Town?
Well, way to let the mask slip there, Professor. This is very typical authoritarian logic. We're all too stupid to know how to make decisions regarding our own lives, so that's why we need government or some other authority dictating and controlling us. And if you really do feel that people are too uninformed to make these decisions for themselves, then maybe the solution isn't necessarily mandates. Maybe the solution is simply to just encourage informed decision making, like I discussed previously.
Unsurprisingly, this did cause a wave of panic among conspiracy theories and anti-vaxxers on social media.
I like how anyone who's against vaccine mandates is automatically considered a conspiracy theorist or anti-vaxxer. Like, yeah, if you think your personal health decisions should be your business and not the government's, you're an anti-vaxxer apparently. But I think this is another area where trying to mandate the vaccine or pressure people into taking it could potentially backfire. Are there wacky bullshit conspiracy theories about the vaccine out there? Absolutely, there's wacky conspiracy theories about everything. But here's the thing, Professor. When you try to mandate the vaccine, you're actually giving these people ammunition. If you try to force the vaccine on the people, then that kind of adds credulence to the idea that there might be something wrong with the vaccine. After all, if the vaccine was really safe, wouldn't people be willing to take it voluntarily? Not helping matters. Most people who are in favor of vaccine mandates are also in favor of censoring any and all criticisms against the vaccine, which further compounds the idea that the pro-vaccine side has something to hide. The best way to combat anti-vax conspiracy theories is to debate and discuss them, because then these anti-vax conspiracy theories would have to compete in the marketplace of ideas against actual medical journals and data.
So it was fun to watch while it lasted. The next major event is the third dose of the Pfizer and Moderna, which I believe is on target from being implemented sometime mid to late September. There's good evidence that the vaccine efficacy rate declines over time, which is unsurprising, but also kind of surprising. Most vaccines you get usually last a bit longer, but of course it is different for different vaccines. We've seen efficacy rates drop from 95% to 60 or even 70% over the course of months.
So, of course, one of the things being currently debated right now, as far as the pandemic goes, is the idea of additional booster doses for the vaccines. Now, it's not uncommon for vaccines to require occasional booster doses. The flu vaccine, for example, requires an occasional booster, so it's not something that's outlandishly outside the realm of possibility. And I'm not against boosters themselves necessarily. I think they can potentially be a good option for people who are immunocompromised and need the vaccine to have an extra bit of gusto. The concern I have with the boosters is pretty much the same concern I have with the original vaccine. People taking it as a result of pressure or coercion as opposed to being a properly informed medical decision. For example, Dr. Fauci and the CDC have already talked about changing the definition of fully vaccinated to require people to take the booster doses. This would essentially give them carte blanche to prolong the pandemic indefinitely, because now every time the population reaches the desired vaccination threshold, they could just arbitrarily increase the number of doses required for full vaccination and say, look, most of the population isn't fully vaccinated.
But this is expected since the Delta variant is essentially its own separate beast.
You'll often hear people on the left fearmonger about the Delta variant so that they can continue to drag out the pandemic, but all the data shows the vaccine is effective against the Delta variant as well, especially if you have hybrid immunity. Hybrid immunity is when you have immunity from having caught COVID before in addition to the vaccine. Hybrid immunity provides the breast protection not just against the vanilla virus, but against all the variants as well.
And then we have people on the other side of the spectrum who is lying about their vaccination records in order to get a third dose, out of fear for the virus. Although I can understand why people would be motivated to do such a thing, just be cautious that you're wandering a little into unknown territory here. I suggest waiting until the third dose is approved to be given out and then heading to your local pharmacy to get the shot.
I'm glad Professor Stick brought this up because I feel it brings to light a very important way that all this COVID fearmongering can potentially be very irresponsible. While I'm not trying to downplay the impact that COVID can potentially have on people, it was definitely irresponsible of the media to try and stir up all this fear and panic about the virus. By trying to convince the public that COVID is this super dangerous death plague that we should all be very afraid of, it may very well cause people to make irrational decisions out of fear. It wouldn't surprise me if someone died from overdosing on the vaccine because they were just that scared of the virus.
Okay, so for the remainder of this video, I want to talk about some misinformation floating around on the internet, specifically the notion that vaccinated people spread the virus just as often as unvaccinated people.
I haven't heard anyone saying that, at all. I mean, I'm sure there are people out there saying that, but I think it's safe to say that's probably the minority opinion. The only people who seem to believe that are people on the left, since they seem to insist that we keep all these COVID restrictions in place, even after taking the vaccine. You know, people on the right are often called anti-vaxxers, but people on the left are insisting that we continue to wear masks even after being vaccinated. Kinda makes you wonder who's really doubting the efficacy of vaccines.
If two people were exposed to COVID, one vaccinated and one not, chances are the unvaccinated person will get sick and spread it to others, while the vaccinated individual has a 60 to 90% chance of not getting sick, and therefore won't spread the virus, whatever the efficacy rate is.
It sounds like to me then that the only people whom unvaccinated people will spread the virus to are other unvaccinated people. In other words, people who voluntarily decided to forgo the vaccine and accept the risk of COVID. The reason this is important to point out is because it kind of defeats the moral basis for a vaccine mandate. The only people whom unvaccinated people are putting at risk are people who consented to the risk.
So where are we now? With about 120,000 new cases per day.
I've mentioned this in previous videos, but a new case doesn't necessarily indicate a new infection. If you increase testing, you're going to find new confirmed cases. Those could be new infections, or they could be people who were previously infected but didn't know it, which isn't uncommon since most people don't experience symptoms. Which raises another issue. Just looking at confirmed cases doesn't give you the full impact of the pandemic. A confirmed case tells you whether or not someone is infected with COVID, it doesn't tell you whether or not they're experiencing symptoms. This is why the media likes to talk about cases, because they can continue making COVID seem like this big scary thing, even when things like death and hospitalization due to COVID are on a decline.
A new variant rampaging everywhere.
So whenever people fearmonger about COVID variants, just keep in mind that all a variant is a change in the genetic code of the virus. It could make it more deadly, it could make it less deadly, it could have no effect on it at all.
I think this pandemic is going on far longer than we originally anticipated.
Maybe for you it is, but that's not what I'm seeing. Everywhere I look, life is basically back to the way it was in 2019. People are crowding in bars, having mass gatherings. People are traveling once again. Unless you're a far left liberal, most people understand why it's absolutely retarded to continue to be scared of a disease you're vaccinated against.
Look, the pandemic will only truly end once we get all the variants under control, and to prevent new variants from arising, we need to slow down the spread.
So Professor Stick basically just confirmed what I predicted before. The whole goal behind the variant narrative is to have a permanent pandemic, because it's literally impossible to stop a virus from spreading or evolving and forming new variants. Even in countries with near 100% vaccination status, like Israel and Iceland, there's still confirmed positive cases. And there's always new variants of the flu coming out, even though most people are vaccinated against it. Like it or not, COVID is here to stay. You're never going to get rid of it completely. And we can't continue to lock down and force people to wear masks forever. We're going to have to learn to live with COVID, just like we've learned to live with every other illness out there.
The Delta variant was first identified in India during the time when they had uncontrollable infections throughout the country. Because the more people that are infected, the more likely a virus mutates and becomes more potent than the original strain.
So yes, viruses, just like any other piece of biology, do mutate and evolve over time. But as I've mentioned previously, this doesn't always result in the virus becoming more potent. Sometimes it can actually have the opposite effect. The fact that the Delta variant is more contagious than the original virus leads me to believe that it might actually be less dangerous as well. Because if the Delta variant has more of an opportunity to spread, then it's probably being friendlier to its host.
And in order to fight the spread, we must make sure people social distance, wear masks, and get vaccinated.
I can't think of a worse way to convince people to take the vaccine than tell them that they'll continue to have to take all these precautions even after taking the vaccine. This entire pandemic, the vaccines have been sold to us as the ticket back to normal life, which is why it's perfectly understandable why when people on the left say you still need to wear a mask even after being vaccinated, people respond by saying go fuck yourself.
Which is why I'm in favor of mandates.
German, hello?
Ach, guten Morgen. My name is SpongeBob.
Say what?
Guten Morgen. My name is SpongeBob. Ik bin gekommen mijn oude Heimat besuchen.
So this is that typical authoritarian mindset of just have the government force people to do something and the problem will magically go away. It's the same mentality behind gun control, minimum wage, rent control. The problem we have here specifically with vaccine mandates is the same problem basically underlying those other things I listed off. People only think about the benefits of what they're advocating for and don't fully think through the ramifications. Oh, we'll just force everyone to take the vaccine and they'll take it and everything will be wonderful. But what if they don't take the vaccine? What if you were to mandate the vaccine and instead of taking it, they tell you to eat shit and leave? And then you get situations like what New York is going through, where they're so short-handed on doctors and other medical staff that they're actually relying on the military to provide civilian medical services. Situations like this are very common when you see government coercion as the magic answer to every problem and don't fully think through the potential consequences.
That being said, the battle is not only here in the United States. Other countries where COVID is spreading, we need to make sure the people there get vaccinated too. If helping other people isn't enough of an incentive, then consider this selfish motive instead. If people in other countries get infected, it will increase the chances of new variants arising, which will ultimately make its way back to the United States. If we truly want to move on from this pandemic, we need to do more, and we need to take as many measures as possible to prevent infections everywhere else in the world.
This is an argument I hear from the left all the time. We can't just focus on vaccinations here in America. We have to make sure the whole world is vaccinated, because variants or whatever. Well, here's an idea. Here's a suggestion. Instead of trying to force people here who don't want to take the vaccine to take it, maybe send those vaccine doses overseas to the countries that are short on vaccines. You know, sending something where people want it, where there's a shortage, as opposed to trying to force it on to people who don't want it. I mean, that just sounds like a more efficient use of resources.
Nothing about COVID should be a political issue. This is a public health concern that affects every single one of us.
How stupid are you?
Look, Professor, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't both whine about COVID being made into a political issue and advocate for vaccine mandates. Now, I agree that I don't think COVID should be a political issue. I believe that all debates and discussions around COVID should be solely within the domain of health and biology. I think that any sort of precautions taken regarding COVID should be a matter of personal choice and not forced onto you by the government. The problem is that Professor Stick doesn't believe that. He's in favor of the government mandating COVID precautions. He's in favor of taking COVID and pushing it into the realm of politics. Because when you argue that we should expand government power to restrict individual liberty, that is a political argument, whether you like it or not, Professor. Well, that concludes this response. This has been Philosophossum, happy to be back fighting for freedom and making stupidity play dead. Until next time, take care.